Okay, so I wanted to do a video on interrupt triggers in Marvel Champions and about some of the confusion I've seen in some forums and other areas where some people seem to think all interrupt triggers work or resolve before the triggering condition in every case. That's how they believe it works, or that's how they think it should work. But I'm gonna try and get to the root of that problem, and then kind of propose a solution as to how the RRG could be reworded to explain how they work. So there seems to be some sort of confusion about how interrupt triggers work. I believe the problem is the rules guide, the RRG, for Marvel Champions. I believe it's both inconsistent and does not explain the ways which differently worded interrupts should resolve, or how they actually resolve in game. So what is a triggering condition, and an interrupt? I'll explain these terms in the context of Marvel Champions, the card game, and not with respect to any other card game. So, briefly, and in general, an interrupt is the bold text of the word itself, interrupt, which indicates to players that they may interrupt some step or sequence of the game to perform some ability text, as written on a card. A triggering condition is the text that comes after a bold interrupt word on a card. The format is usually formulated as, quote, interrupt, colon, when triggering condition, comma, ability text, unquote. So a fleshed out example would be a card like Backflip, which reads interrupt, colon, when you would take any amount of damage from an attack, comma, prevent all of that damage, unquote. And there are, however, other slight variations of this form. I will start with this form because it's closer to the typical way the RRG indicates an interrupt should resolve, which is immediately before the triggering condition. So how does the RRG inconsistently describe how and when interrupt triggers resolve? In various places throughout the RRG, mostly pages 9 and 10, interrupt abilities are described as happening immediately before the triggering condition. Yet, it also reads that interrupt abilities may be executed any time the specific triggering condition occurs. It says the latter exactly one time in the RRG. The former happens or occurs a few times in the RRG, I think around 3 or 4. I'll post the images. I think we can reasonably agree that immediately before a point in time or a triggering condition occurs, it has not actually happened yet. And anytime a point in time or a triggering condition occurs is when that point is happening. And one thing that kind of compounds this is the word itself, interrupt, implies that it's something that happens in the middle of something, whereas the word preclude would mean that it's something that happens way before a thing would occur. But maybe that's a digression. So, in this way, the RRG offers up 2 different ways of resolving an interrupt. It says both that interrupt abilities may be executed anytime the specific triggering condition occurs, and it also says immediately before the triggering condition. So, inconsistent. And there are segments of the community which believe that all interrupts should resolve immediately before the triggering conditions, even though there are cards that would not work, specifically Black Widow, if they worked like that, or if they resolved in that way. I don't think it's the problem with the card itself or any other cards that do resolve this way. Instead, it's the RRG, its inconsistency, Even if the RRG doesn't make it completely clear that interrupts resolve both when their triggering condition is imminent for some cards and when the triggering condition occurs for other cards, in practice, this is how it actually plays out. So there are two words I will use to distinguish and to define the function of each of these two ways to resolve an interruptibility. Imminent and occurs. An interrupt trigger which functions with the imminent definition will always resolve its ability immediately before its triggering condition actually happens. And an interrupt trigger which functions with the occurs definition will always resolve its ability while its triggering condition happens, or is happening to some extent. So this is the definition I propose should be used by people who play this game, and probably should be implemented in the RRG in some fashion. So a list of some interrupt cards which the definition of imminent, as I've described it, applies. Great responsibility, webbed up, shield block, backflip, cosmic flight. Great responsibility, for example, tells the player that when a threat being placed becomes imminent, you do something else instead. In Champions, this is referred to as a replacement effect. Replacement effects and cards that prevent will all have the word would in their triggering condition text. These are also all the cards which the imminent definition certainly applies to the interrupt trigger function. These are cards with abilities that resolve immediately before the triggering condition. However, card triggers without the word would do not regard the imminent definition as I've described it, but instead, these card abilities will resolve with the occurs definition, which means the ability resolves when the triggering condition occurs or is occurring. A list of some interrupt cards which have the triggering condition that allow its ability text to resolve as the triggering condition occurs. Spider Sense, Nova, Emergency, Black Widow, Expert Defense. Black Widow, for example, we know from watching developer gameplay that the intention of Black Widow is to see the card, to reveal it, and decide whether you want to cancel it with her interrupt ability. The ability reads cancel the effects of that card. The ability cannot cancel the effects of an unrevealed card. Since there are no effects of an unrevealed card, it's also the case that unrevealed cards are technically out of play and cannot be targeted by Widow's ability text as written. So it follows that the triggering condition of when a card is revealed from the encounter deck must actually occur in order for the cancel to apply. So how can we tell which interrupt resolves with the which interrupts resolve with the imminent definition and which resolves with the occurs definition? The format can tell us, the format of the card text. So cards like Great Responsibility, Webbed Up, etc., all of the imminent definition, all of these cards that resolve with the imminent definition will have the format of, quote, when X would happen, do Y instead, unquote, or when X would happen, prevent an aspect of an X format. And cards that happen with the cards in which the occurs definition apply, cards like Spider Sense, Nova, etc. Each of these cards will have the format of when X happens, do Y. So it's very simple. All of the cards that resolve immediately before the triggering condition are when X would happen, do Y instead, or when X would happen, prevent an aspect of X. All of the cards that have triggering cards which abilities resolve during the triggering condition have the when X happens, do Y format. And the purpose of this video to end is just to call attention to the inconsistency in the RRG, how it may be confusing, causing confusion to people, and to suggest how to clarify the RRG's interrupt section. I don't believe it's the case that all interrupt cards should have their abilities, the resolve abilities, rewritten or errated. I think it would be fine just to change the RRG, but if I did get anything wrong, or if there's some inconsistency in what I'm saying, or you just disagree, please let me know why. I did try to have somebody who was actually testing some of the some similar games overlook the text of this video. They have not gotten back to me as of the recording time, so I'm not able to take their any of their impressions into account. So I could be off somewhere, although I think I've made a fair case for how these abilities should resolve and how the RRG should be retooled to be more clear. Okay, thanks. Bye.